Well, what's up? Welcome everybody to City Life this weekend. We haven't met yet. My name is Brad. I'm the lead pastor here, and I'm so happy you're here. Today we're in a series called Jesus Flex, and I want to kick off with a question today. How many of you are weather junkies? Any weather junkies in the house? You just love that weather app? Anybody? It's okay. It's a safe place. Go ahead. In fact, I'm going to do a little survey right now. Confession is good for the soul. How many of you've already checked the forecast for tonight? Let me see it. Come on, be proud. Loud and proud. That's fine. I think that's normal. Check it for tonight. How many would say you've already checked the weather forecast for next weekend? Let me see your hand. All right. See you next weekend. I'm going to take it a step further. How many of you've already checked the weather forecast for Labor Day? Let me see. Anybody? Thank you for your honesty. Thank you. Thank you. One more. Halloween. Anybody check the weather forecast yet for Halloween? Is it going to be a clear night for trick-or-treating? Thank you. This is a place of healing. We're going to have some support groups in our next life group semester for all of you. But there was a time when you didn't have a weather app. You just would be surprised by the weather. And today we're going to look at a story from the life of Jesus, a moment when Jesus and his disciples were surprised by a storm. And the story is in Mark chapter 4. And I hope this story encourages you, because the reality is that just as storms kick up over seas, creating really damaging weather patterns, storms also roll into our lives. And they can create a lot of destruction. They can catch us off guard. But if you're a follower of Jesus, I want you to know today, you never have to face a storm alone. So let's look at this fascinating story in Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. This is Jesus who says to the disciples, let's get in the boat, let's cross the Sea of Galilee. Now I want to show you a picture. This is really crazy discovery that took place in 1986. This is called the Ancient Galilee Boat. It is on display in a museum now near the Sea of Galilee in Israel. We don't get too many glimpses of what furniture or transportation would have looked like in Jesus' day, but this is actually parts of a boat that were recreated that are dated all the way back to the 1st century. So while we don't know that Jesus ever rode in this boat, we know that this is what the boats would have looked like in his day. And so the disciples and Jesus, they're in a boat very similar to this. The disciples are experienced oarsmen, experienced sailors, and they're heading out in the evening, in the dark, onto the Sea of Galilee. And it says in verse 37 that a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. I want to show you another picture just to help explain, and I want you to visualize some of the geography that would impact the weather around the Sea of Galilee. This is a picture of the Sea of Galilee. You can see it almost looks like a bowl, and the Sea of Galilee is a fascinating body of water. It is about 13 miles long, 7 miles wide. At its widest point, it's over 200 feet deep at its deepest point. But it is also the lowest body of water in the world in relationship to sea level. So it's very, very low. But what's interesting and what makes the storms so severe on the Sea of Galilee is that it is surrounded by mountains. To the west of the Sea of Galilee are the hills of Galilee that are 1,500 feet high. To the north of the Sea of Galilee is Mount Hermon, which is part of the mountains of Lebanon. And that mountain peak is 9,200 feet high. So you have these mountains, especially in the winter, the snow would melt from the peaks of the mountains. It would bring down cold air into this basin, into this lake that is the lowest body of water in the world. And it would mix with the warm air off the Mediterranean and the warm air coming in off of the desert. And the warm air and the cold air would mix down in this bowl and kind of just get trapped, and it would create these tornado-like winds. And that's why the Sea of Galilee, it could change almost instantly, transform from a gentle, serene experience into a violent storm. And that's what's happening here for Jesus and the disciples. In fact, Mark uses a word in the ESV. It says great windstorm. It literally is a word that translates mega. And what's fascinating about this word is that the same word shows up 3 times in this short story. It's 150 words in this story in the English Standard Version in Mark 4. But this exact word shows up 3 times, the word mega or the word great. I'll point them out as we go along. But the first one is to describe the scope of this storm. It was a violent storm, a mega storm. And you can imagine how the disciples, again, who were experienced on the water, many of them grew up with fathers in the fishing business, grew up as little boys on the sea. They had been through storms many, many times. But here, this storm is so wild that the winds are shaking the boat back and forth. The waves are already crashing over the side of the boat, filling up the boat with water. They feel like they're about to capsize. And I think this story has been so encouraging for disciples of Jesus for so many years because it's so relatable. It's so personal. The reality is that we're all going to go through storms in life. Storms are coming. And we learn some things about the nature of storms right here in this story, that storms, first of all, are involuntary. The disciples didn't choose to enter into this storm. It just hit them. And there are moments in life that we can't control. We think we have a lot of control over our lives until those moments when the storm hits and we realize we really have no control at all. And not even our wisdom and our experience can keep us out of the storm. Here are some men who grew up, again, on the sea, and yet their wisdom, their experience can't keep them out of the storm. They are forced into the storm, whether they wanted to be in it or not, ready or not. Storms are, secondly, surprising. They can catch us off guard. In fact, there's an interesting detail in Luke chapter 8, the parallel account of this story from Luke's gospel, that when they first started out sailing on the Sea of Galilee, it says that they were sailing. So it was very calm at first. They just had the sails up. They weren't even rowing. It was a serene, peaceful, calm night out on the lake. They're just chilling, they're sailing, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, have you ever experienced this in your life? You're just sailing along through life, sailing along through the week, sailing along through the year, and all of a sudden, you are blindsided by a storm that changes everything about your life. Storms are involuntary, they're surprising, and they are overpowering. It can feel like when you're hit by a mega storm that the storm just takes charge. And the disciples are experiencing this, and it's so fascinating how Jesus relates to the storm, very different than you and I. Verse 38 says, but he was in the stern, that's the back of the boat for you land lovers. And it says he was asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? What a real moment. What a human moment. Jesus, he's tired. It's been a long day. He's been teaching parables. He's been healing the sick. And he goes to sleep on a cushion. It's not like he's got this below deck yacht, king-size bed to stretch out on. He's like in the fetal position probably on this little cushion. So exhausted. He's sleeping in the middle of this storm. And the sense I get is that the disciples at first, they're really not trying to bother Jesus. They're thinking, we've been through storms before, we can handle this. But they get so desperate and they get so afraid as the storm intensifies that they wake up Jesus. And it's not this peaceful kind of arousing of, hey, Jesus, you know, like I'm waking up one of my kids in the morning. How was your rest? Did you sleep good? No, they're angry. They are panicking. And they shake him and they say, Jesus, don't you care that we're all about to die? Ever felt like that? Hello, God. I'm losing it here. Don't you even care? You see what's going on? I don't know how I'm going to get through this, God. And if you have ever felt like God was asleep at the wheel in your life, sleeping on the job, wondering, God, do you even see me? Do you even care about what I'm going through right now? You're not alone. Even these men who lived with Jesus, followed Jesus, they felt that. And then verse 39 shows us Jesus' response. You got to love Jesus. He doesn't answer their question. He ignores them totally. And he goes right to the point of what he's trying to accomplish here. he awoke, and in my mind, it's this picture of Jesus just kind of, slowly getting up. I don't know if he's rubbing his eyes a little bit, just kind of stretching. And then it says that he rebuked the wind. This is a really strong word in the original language that translates be muzzled. He looked at the wind first and he said, shut up. He looked at the wind, he said, be muzzled. It's very similar language to when Jesus would cast a demon out of a person. Quiet. Be muzzled. He rebuked the wind, and then he turned to the sea. He turned to the waves. Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. There's our second mega. It's the same word. There's a great storm, and now there is a mega calm. If you've ever been on the sea in a storm, you know that even when the storm stops and the waves start to die down, the boat continues to shake. The waves continue still for a while. But in this moment, Jesus says, he rebukes the wind. He says to the waves, peace, be still. And instantly, the entire sea, you could look down, you could see the reflection of your face in the sea. That's how calm it was. Mark calls it a mega calm. As powerful as the storm was, that's how powerful the peace became. It's how powerful the calm became. And Jesus looks at them in verse 40 and he asks them two questions. And these two questions speak to the heart of what Jesus is trying to accomplish in us during the storms in our lives. He said to them, question number one, why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid? And question number two, have you still no faith? And he goes to the heart of what this story is about. It's about faith. It's about the faith of the disciples. It's about your faith. It's about my faith. It's about the relationship between faith and fear. And so I want to give you a definition. This is a very simple definition of faith that hopefully can help. Faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Faith. Complete trust or confidence in someone or something. What's the relationship between fear and faith? Fear, when it overtakes us, is usually an indicator that our faith has been misplaced. Fear, if it overtakes us, is usually a tip that we have put our confidence and our trust in the wrong person or the wrong persons or the wrong idea or the wrong thing. And so Jesus says, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Guys, after all the time we've spent together, after all the miracles you've seen me perform, after all that I have done among you, do you still not trust me that I'm going to take care of this? Do you still have so little confidence that I have a plan? Why is it that the storms of life sneak up on us and blindside us and overpower us, and our instinct is fear instead of faith? And what would it look like if we could flip the script and our impulse could be, instead of fear, faith and trust in confidence in God? That's the goal. And as we come to verse 41 and the conclusion of this story, we see our third mega, and this honestly is probably the most surprising thing to me in this story that's full of surprises. But here's what it says in verse 41. And they were filled with, here's number 3, great fear, and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? So in verse 37, we've got a mega storm. Verse 39, a mega calm. Now in verse 41, mega fear. And isn't it interesting that their fear doesn't climax during the storm? Their fear grows to its crescendo after the calm. It's after Jesus has calmed the storm. It's after Jesus has brought peace to the wind and the waves. Now they are really afraid. Now they're freaked out. Their fear was not ultimately triggered by the storm as much as it was by the calm. And as you look at it, it's so interesting to me. It's one thing to have a storm outside your boat that you can't control, but now they've got a God inside their boat they realize we can't control. Their brains are in overload by the sudden storm, followed by the sudden calm, and they had no category for this. What Jesus has done, it's too great to comprehend, and that sounds a lot like God, doesn't it? A loving being too great to comprehend. A loving being too big for you and I to control. Now the disciples had Jesus in a boat. We don't usually have God in a boat. We don't do as much fishing today. But here's what we do today in our lives. We don't have God in a boat, but we sometimes have God in a box. God in a box. And I'm gonna give a shout out to Pastor Rich Wilkerson for the inspiration behind this illustration. But we got God in a box and we carry him around, and give ourselves a little credit. We look for a pretty big box. This box is pretty good size. And we've got God in the box. Here's God. I take him with me. I'm just gonna set him here for a few minutes. God, you can see there, notice it says fragile, handle with care. This is my God. I wanna make sure that he's under control. You know, I'm gonna let him out a couple Sundays a month. And you know, if things are really going well or I'm really feeling desperate, maybe I'll crack the top of the box open on a Wednesday or Thursday. But Friday, Saturday, just gotta get back in the box there, God. It's God in a box. And our boxes say less about what's true about God and really reveal a lot more about us. And our experiences and our pain and our doubts and our false assumptions about who God is. What happens is that we have false beliefs about God, and those false beliefs create a box, and that box becomes a barrier to the maturing of our faith. And, you know, we think silly thoughts like God needs me. Newsflash, City Life family. God doesn't need you. God doesn't need your love. God doesn't need your talents. You know, God is not insecure. He's not up in heaven just hoping, man, I really hope they like me this week. He's not thinking August, a lot of vacations in August. I really hope people show up at church this weekend. God's not worried about that. God doesn't need your input. God doesn't need your approval. But we put God in a box and think we need to carry him around. And there he is. And we can limit God and begin to think wrong thoughts about God and who he is. And I want you to see this and think about it with me, because these false beliefs that create the box that becomes the barrier to the faith. What's the barrier for you? For a lot of us, the God in the box is kind of like the Wizard of Oz, and he's behind the curtain somewhere and he's pulling the strings, but he's not really involved in your life. He certainly doesn't care about what's going on in your life. For others of us, the God in the box is bodyguard God. And that's the God that we carry around, and that's the God that we've come to believe in. A version of God whose job it is to make sure nothing bad ever happens to us. Whose job it is to make sure that nothing painful ever comes into our lives. Well, if you've got bodyguard God shoved into a box, no wonder you're disoriented when a storm comes along. No wonder you're gonna be confused about your faith when a storm comes along, because you have decided that God is in this box where he's not big enough to be God in the midst of your pain. He can only be God if your situation in your life is butterflies and roses and rainbows. And it's our false beliefs about God that create these boxes that become barriers to our faith. And here's the problem. You can't build a life of faith on the foundation of faulty beliefs about God. You can't do it. And so here's the question that I want to leave with you today, and I hope you'll wrestle with this question. Is your faith ready to face the storms of life? Because the storms are coming. And when they do, is your faith ready to endure? Is your faith ready to lead you into that storm so you can thrive in the midst of that storm and persevere through that storm? Jesus is so committed to developing your faith. That's why he allows the disciples to sail into the storm. That's why he will allow you to sail into some storms, because he would rather strengthen and refine your faith than give you a perfectly comfortable life. So is your faith ready to face the storms of life? How do we build our faith so that it is? I want to leave you with 3 just really simple ideas from this story as we close today. And the first one is this: is you build your faith to face the storms of life. Number 1, build your faith on God's promises. Look at Mark 4. I want to take you back to the verse we started with. It sets this whole story up in verse 35. On that day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." What did Jesus say to them to kick off this whole journey? Let's go where? To the other side. He didn't say, hey, let's travel out to the middle of the lake. I'm going to take a nap, then a storm's going to capsize the boat, and that'll be it for this little adventure we've been on. Jesus said to them, let's go to the other side. And there are things that Jesus speaks into our lives when the sea is calm, when our lives are calm. You write them in a journal, you share them with a friend, they encourage you, they build your faith. Isn't it amazing how quickly we forget and how quickly we let go of the word and the promise and the sense of assurance just because we enter into a dark season of our life? We enter into a zone of a storm and we begin to forget. And I just want you to know today, if Jesus said you're going over, you're not going under. That's right. And don't panic. Listen, don't panic if it feels like God is silent. Don't panic if it feels like he's asleep. Don't panic because he's already spoken. He's already said, we're going to the other side. Don't panic if it feels like he's silent in your life, because listen, he has already spoken. And this book, listen, is full of hundreds of promises that have been recorded and written and digitized and passed down now for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they are promises that apply to your finances, promises that apply to your health, promises that apply to your kids, promises that apply to your relationships, to your career, to your grief, to the losses in your life, promises that apply to your anxiety. And those promises belong to you as your inheritance as God's child. They're yours. They're yours. And I want you to know today that no matter what type of storm you're going through, it may be out of your control, but it is not out of God's control. He is sovereign. He is in control. He has a plan, and God has the power to accomplish his plan. So you can trust him. You can be confident in him. You can know his promises. You can personalize his promises. You can pray his promises. You can declare his promises. You can stand on his promises as an anchor for your heart, no matter what storm may come your way. You build your faith on something solid, the promises that God has spoken to us in his word. Number 2, how are we going to mature our faith to get it ready for the storms of life? Build your faith on God's love. I feel like this, to me, feels like the weightiest thing I'm trying to communicate today, and I've been praying, getting ready to preach this message. God, help me to communicate this. And I feel like the words I have are inadequate to do it. I've just been praying, God, help us to remember when the storm hits us and blindsides us that we are loved. That we are loved. Because our instinct is the same as the disciples. God, don't you care? We just assume. It's a false premise. It's a false belief that if God allows something painful to come, he doesn't care. And in our rational minds, it feels like, well, if you have the power to shield somebody from pain, why wouldn't you do it? But Jesus rejects that idea. And he rejects it with these 2 questions that are so important. Why are you so afraid? And where's your faith? Why are you so afraid? Well, if the disciples were going to answer it, well, that's a pretty simple answer, Jesus. We're about to die. You want to know why we're so afraid? This boat's about to sink. We're about to die. But Jesus implies with his second question, the problem is not with this storm at all. The problem is with your faith. The problem is that you don't trust me, that I'm for you and I'm with you and I love you even when things are difficult. That's the problem. Because if you believed that and if you remembered that, you would not have to fear even if it felt like you were going under. If you believed you were loved, listen, if we could see Jesus with 100% accuracy for even 10 minutes, if we could experience the width, the length, the height, the depth of his love purely for even 10 seconds, it would prepare us for the worst 10 minutes of our lives, the worst 10 weeks of your life, the worst 10 months of your life, the worst 10 years of your life. But we doubt it and we cast it aside and we question it because our lives are painful. But I want to point something out to you in this story that I think is fascinating. If you compare this story with a story from the Old Testament about a man named Jonah, it's so interesting. Jonah, in fact, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it's a book called the Septuagint. The Old Testament was translated from Hebrew into Greek. And in that Greek translation of the Old Testament, a lot of the words in Jonah's story are the exact words that Mark uses in Mark chapter 4 for this story. And the parallels are mind-blowing. Both Jesus and Jonah were in a boat. Both boats encountered storms. Both Jesus and Jonah were asleep at the bottom of the boat. In both accounts, the others in the boat wake up Jonah and wake up Jesus, saying, we're gonna die. In both stories, there's a miraculous calming of the sea. In both stories, both the sailors and the disciples are more afraid after the sea is calmed than they were during the storm itself. Fascinating parallels between the stories, but here's the biggest connection that we can't miss. What does Jonah say in his story to the sailors needs to take place in order for them to live? He says, you got to throw me overboard. If you guys are going to survive, if you guys are going to live, I got to die. You got to throw me overboard. And it's the throwing of Jonah overboard that calms the sea and brings life to the rest of the sailors. And what is it that Jesus said in the Gospel of Matthew? He said, one greater than Jonah is here. I'm the ultimate Jonah, because Jesus recognized that for you to live, I've got to be thrown overboard. And Jesus was thrown overboard into the storm of sin. He was thrown overboard into the storm of death. He was thrown overboard into the storm of hell, into the storm of God's wrath, into the storm of God's judgment. Why? Because he loves you. And what more could God ever do to prove to you, to demonstrate that he's for you, that he loves you, that he's with you, that he's committed to you, that he's not going to let you go, then allow his only son to be thrown overboard into the greatest storm that has ever raged on planet Earth at the cross, where Jesus was separated from the Father. And if Jesus would face that ultimate storm, do you know what it proves? He's not going to abandon you in the smaller storms of your life. He's with you. He loves you. And for you and I to know when we're going through the storm that we are absolutely and radically loved by God changes everything. Why are you so afraid? Do you know how loved you are? Do you understand that if God's allowed you to go through it, there's a loving reason why? We build our faith on the love of God. It strengthens us. It allows us to endure. It makes us fearless. The love of God, listen, casts out all fear. The perfect love of God. And the cross is forever the proof of God's immeasurable love for you and what gives you the confidence to trust him through every single storm. in life. And then finally, build your faith on God's power. We see the humanity of Jesus at play in this story. Jesus is exhausted, so tired. You ever been so tired that you could just fall asleep anywhere? So tired from teaching and healing and casting out demons and being mobbed by needs everywhere he goes. So tired, so exhausted, he falls asleep in a hurricane. Yet, even as we look at the stunning humanity of Jesus, make no mistake about it, this man is God. He's the creator of the universe who rules the wind and the waves. That's why the disciples say, who is this man? Even the winds and the waves line up at his word. I mean, we knew he was a rabbi, we believed he was the Messiah, but we have underestimated this man. You trying to be God in the middle of your storm? Permission not have to be God anymore. He's God all by himself. What does this do with our boxes? I want to read one more scripture from Isaiah 46. This is an Old Testament prophet who is speaking a little sarcastically to God's people who have begun to worship the Babylonian gods, the Babylonian idols. And he begins to say to them, to whom will you compare me? Who is my equal? Some people pour out their silver and gold and hire a craftsman to make a god from it. Then they bow down and worship it, their own creation. Look at what he says. They carry it around on their shoulders. And when they set it down, it stays there. It can't even move. And when someone prays to it, there is no answer from bodyguard God. He doesn't exist. It can't rescue anyone from trouble. Yet we put God in a box. We think we can carry him around. God does not need you for transportation. We say the silliest things if you think about it. Oh, I let God down. I let God down. You ever thought that? Blew it, made a mistake. Oh, sorry God, I let you down. Listen, you can't let God down unless you were the one holding him up. And you're not holding God up. And some of you, listen, your God is too small. Not God himself, but the version of God you've created with the false beliefs you have about God that have created this box that's become a barrier to the maturing of your faith. And for so many of us, listen, we're overwhelmed with anxiety, overwhelmed with fear and worry. And what we need to do is we need to open up the box. We need to let God out of the box. Because here's the problem, listen, as long as you've got God in the box and you're carrying him around, I'm gonna do it. Listen, he can't carry you. And so we gotta repent. We gotta change our mind about these false beliefs about who God is so that we can recognize, God, you're not in my hands, I'm in yours. I don't want a God I can control. I don't want a God that never disagrees with me. I don't want a God who can't challenge me. I want to say to God, God, if you've said it's destructive for my life, I'm going to trust you that you love me. And if I'm going through a storm that's out of my control, I'm going to trust you that you're powerful. And I'm going to open up the box and let God out of the box, because then what happens is you begin to break the box. You begin to see who God has been all along, bigger than you could ever conceive, bigger than you could ever imagine. a God who can be worshiped, a God who can be trusted, a God that you can look to with confidence, a God who is in control, a God who is never caught off guard by the storms of your life, a God who always has a purpose, who always has a reason, who always shows up, who's always present in the midst of the storm. So God, today we invite you to come and hold us. And God, if it takes a storm to break open the box, let it be. We trust you. We invite you to come and carry us. And I pray for those today for whom life has become heavy, for those who are in the middle of a storm. I pray that fear would be extinguished as faith explodes. Trust and confidence in the one true God.